Hello, everybody. This is Joshua Hatton with the One Nation Under Whiskey podcast. I'm joined today, and as nearly always, by my dear friend and co-founder of Single Cask Nation, the ever-wonderful Jason Neal Patrick Harris Johnston Yellen.
Thank you ever so much. Yeah, I think today it's a bit weird. We're missing the third J. Jess isn't in the studio today after being with Scotland. Being in Scotland with her for so many days and just being such a loud, proud J team. Kind of missing her in today's recording. So, Jess, you are ever in our thoughts as we conduct today's interview.
Is she in London now, or I know she went off to London?
If you're asking me for her travel calendar, I have no clue.
She hasn't shared with you either, huh?
As we say in Glasgow.
There are some people that are listening to this and some people that are watching this. And for those that are watching it, they can see that my hands are disappearing. And I want to...
Back to the Future style.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Is this 1984? Look at her shirt.
Do you need to get your parents to meet at a high school dance?
Save the clock tower. There's a reason why. So we haven't really talked about this, but we're moving house, and I've gotten to the point where I'm starting to empty my bottle shelves. And so for the viewers, I'm going to show you what my room currently looks like. And you'll see why I'm using this fake virtual reality picture. Because, man, it's funny looking. There we go. This is what my room currently looks like.
That looks more fake than the actual fake photo you're using.
It does. Look, I'm missing a couple bass guitars. There's a baseball, at least, on one of my shelves.
That looks like the squirrels exacted retribution. They're like, oh yeah, fuck with our house, we'll fuck with your house. How'd you like this now? All right, we're coming for you. That's good. Those shelves look kind of frightening, but
yeah,
soon you will have a new office, and we will get used to that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, but listeners will be happy to know I will remain in beautiful Guilford, Connecticut, close to New Haven, Connecticut, a.k.a. pizza capital of the world. So do not fear. I can
hear the sighs of relief across the world. Everyone listening to this is like, oh, he's still in Guilford. We can sleep easy tonight, children. It will be okay. Okay. Gosh. Meanwhile, the squirrels are like, yeah, you better keep moving. You better. This is not going to work. All right. Yeah. I'm watching our guests laughing along with us in the green room, but it'll be even more fun once we bring them in with us. So may I have this honor?
Please, honor us.
All right, so we are joined today, and you'll see it on the masthead, but for those of you who just hit play on the latest episode of One Nation Under Whiskey, I'm very pleased to say we have Matt Strickland joining us today. He is currently the Master Distiller at Iron City Distilling. He is a faculty member. He is he's on the board of examiners. He has written 3 books: Cask Management for Distillers in 2020, Batch Distillation, Science and Practice in 2021, and his most recent book is Whiskey from Grain to Glass. And I'm so excited to be discussing cask maturation with him today. So, without further ado, Matt Strickland, come from the green room into the recording studio. Thank you so much for joining us, Matt.
Oh, no, thank you for having me.
So by way of getting to know a little bit more about you, we are very fortunate. And this year we're celebrating our 15th anniversary. So we established Single Cask Nation in 2011, and the podcast is currently in its 10th season. It came a little bit later.
Yeah.
Like a first child and a second child. And so we're asking folk along the way here to cast your mind back. What were you doing 15 years ago in 2011?
I was in graduate school.
Okay.
I was studying fermentation science at Oregon State University. So I was doing research for the wine industry. I was studying enology and viticulture at that point.
Look at that. We were not a million miles away from each other. I was in Pullman, Washington. My wife was completing her graduate studies at Washington State University.
So my thesis advisor went to Pullman. That's where he did his PhD.
At WSU. Yeah. Very nice. Who was your, not that I'm going to know the name, who was your PhD advisor?
My PhD advisor, my master's advisor was James Osborne, and his PhD advisor at Washington State was a gentleman who recently retired, Charles Edwards. Now, I am working on my PhD right now, but that's through Harriet Watt in Scotland.
Sure.
Fantastic. We were not a million miles away from Harriet Watt the other day.
No, I'm sure you are.
Driving on by. So with that said, clearly you're a busy man and a knowledgeable man. And I'm curious, with the first book, Cask Management for Distillers, come out in 2020, I imagine you started writing that before the pandemic happened. So you were not a pandemic-inspired author, is my guess.
No.
Am I right or wrong? And how did the book come about for you?
That was interesting. I'm from the U.S., but I was working in Quebec at the time, running a single malt distillery up there, and I was visited one day by my friend Bill Owens, who is the founder of the American Distilling Institute. I don't know if he's really doing as much traveling as he's kind of gotten on in years anymore, but for a while there, like every year, he would make this big trip, and he would choose some part of the world, and he would just go and he likes to kind of invest himself in the local culture and all that, but of course he's really curious about distilleries. And he let me know that he was coming into town, and I told him, I was like, yeah, come by. I'd love to show you what I'm working on, and showed him all the different barrels that I was using in the program up there. And he got really excited, and he was like, you should write a book about barrels. I stupidly said, yes, I would do that. So, I mean, nobody else was writing it, so I was like, "Yeah, sure, you could have the Village Idiot write it." And then, and that was sort of how that came about. And then, I that came out in 2020, and then I immediately was like, "Well, it'd be kind of fun to write a book on distillation." Because for some reason I thought it would be great to work backwards through the process, which was right. In retrospect, really, really silly. But those are the two aspects of my work that I put the most amount of focus on, academically at least, and So that came about. And then, so each book, it took me about a year to write each book. And then the new book, it took me fucking 5 years or whatever it was. So, I don't really know why, but yeah.
Were there changing conditions there? Advancing career, all those boards you're sitting on, family?
I think, somebody was asking me about that the other day, why it did take me so long. And I was like, shut up, get off my back, dude. But I was like, you try to write a book. I moved to Pittsburgh. I got offered a job. I was consulting on this project, and then they offered me the job to run it. And so I was basically starting a new company. I sit on all these different advisory boards and examination boards, and my list of like speaking engagements and teaching engagements kept growing. And I was writing for magazines, and then I started my PhD, and somewhere in there I had to find time, because as it turns out, I had to be reminded about this. I have a wife and 2 kids. So
All right.
Yeah.
Them.
They reminded me about it.
Right.
Yeah. And I was, so like, like one of my daughters came and sat down next to me and I was like, who the fuck are you? And they were like, I'm your kid.
When
and I
did
was
you
like,
get here?
Yeah.
I remember when you were 6 months old.
I know.
What
I
happened?
was like, do you have a job yet? No. So anyway, no. I mean, and that's the thing. Yeah. So, well, and I think the other part of it too with the third book was that it's this whole textbook on making whiskey from, because it's called Whiskey from Grain to Glass, because I'm not that fucking clever when it comes to titles. And, I was like, people will know what it is if I, that's what I call it. So, I found what was happening. As long as I've been doing this, I'm still learning. And I think that's one of the things I really love about this business. I used to tell people I really hated the title of master distiller. I still do. I hate the title of master distiller, but for many reasons. But one of the main ones was that I kind of felt like if I mastered something, then there wasn't really anything else to learn. And I kind of felt like if I ever reached that point in my career, that I should probably find another job. And so, this project, Iron City, kind of spun into this really crazy history project and looking into old distillation techniques from 150 years ago and old maturation techniques from the era and all this stuff. And I think every project I work on, whether it's my own distilleries or consulting projects or whatever, I'm always learning something new, but this one had me dive down so many different unique little rabbit holes that I almost kind of had to pause the book because I was like, I have to include all these new things that I'm figuring out or that I'm picking up from other people. And it just kind of grew at this, it's me. So like, I'll use it metastasize, because we'll use cancer terminology for my writing. That's what we'll use. That's kind of what happens. So, and I would get kind of close to completion and then I'd be like, oh no, I want to include a section on, chamber stills and how to operate them. And so that became a whole thing. And then even since the first book on maturation, I was like, oh no, I want to include all this other stuff that I've been working on. And so there was just a lot that just kind of snowballed and became a much bigger thing than I ever really intended it to be.
So I'm curious, when you say a moment ago that, the new one has become more of a textbook, one of the things that struck me about the first one, Cask Management for Distillers, is it's incredibly readable. And you go into the science and you kind of talk about even other maturation techniques, but it's a page turner. And there's even some brevity within it as well. And I'm curious, as a first time author, did the book kind of fall from you whole cloth, or were you kind of cognizant of, I want this to be readable, I want this to be accessible? What was the thought process?
It was a little bit of both. I used to write for Whisky Magazine, and they had me on for several issues. They wanted me to kind of be their technical writer. And I remember I was sending them into my editor, who I loved. I mean, she was fantastic. But I remember I said, hey, I noticed that you're kind of editing the hell out of my stuff. And she was like, and she, she sent me, she's very British and just very dry about the whole thing. She's like, well, you're a little too informal for us. And I was like, oh, okay. And so.
Oh, interesting.
Now, the thing was that, coming from academia, and I think we can all kind of relate to this. You grow up, you go through, elementary school or it really sinks in, I think, during high school and then university, where you have to study these textbooks and they're about some very specific topic. But, I can't even remember a textbook that I read during those periods that even on topics that I was genuinely interested in that did make me want to fall asleep. And so there's this whole thing in academic writing where you're expected to be very rigid, very, and I really hate that because I think the whole point of that type of writing is to convey knowledge to the reader. And if you are just writing in this very staid style because that's what's expected, and it doesn't actually convey the information, but it's actually worse because people zone out, they kind of nod off, and you're not really retaining the information all that well. And so there was this, writing the books, there was this very conscious effort of like, well, okay, this is the story I want to tell. And I'm going to back it up with, my experience and with my friends' experiences and the academic literature. But there's a way to talk about all this stuff in a way that, hopefully people will find enjoyable. It should be entertaining. And so, there's no reason why I can't make a fucking fart joke or something. And I don't think I did that, but it's
I was going to say, did I miss the fart jokes in here?
Yeah, I don't think I did. I honestly don't find fart jokes that funny. I think, but it's like low hanging fruit. But anyway, my kids love them, though. But that's the thing. I think that it should be entertaining, though. And a lot of times it's just not, and it just drives me crazy because one thing that I can't stand, and in any avenue, any medium that I work, whether it's making whiskey or writing, and let's face it, those are the only two things I know how to do. I really hate the concept of orthodoxy for orthodoxy's sake. It just, there's no reason for it.
Yeah.
And so, I was actually talking with my older brother who was also in academia and actually taught writing to students at the university level. And he and I got into this and it was funny because he was like, I'd never actually really thought about it, but it's true. Like, it would be so much better if we just wrote the way people would like to read it, meet people where they're at. If you're trying to share knowledge, don't have them come all the way to you. I mean, that's crazy. And I figure if you can't explain some of these concepts in an entertaining way, you probably don't know it that well.
Yeah.
You, sir, have teed up my first big question about maturation.
Okay.
So this is great. You're putting yourself up for the test here. So early in the book, you talk about the primary cask components that we're concerned with are carbohydrates, lignin and lignin degradation products, tannins, char layer if present, lactones, acids.
Mm-hmm.
For the listener, can you just break those down a little bit and let us know what's happening in the wood science there?
Right.
And can you do it in an entertaining and accessible way?
You can't have everything.
Challenge.
You can't have everything, man.
No, with that attitude.
Yeah. That's true. I am incredibly defeatist.
So the man with 3 books to his name.
I'm just like, yeah. So if you think about the structure of oak, and in most, not all, in most whiskey traditions, it has to be oak.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Right? Very rarely do we specify the actual species. I mean, a lot of people don't even understand that in the United States. You can use any kind of oak you want to put bourbon into. It doesn't have to be American oak. It's just that's what is available. So that's what primarily gets used.
Yeah, that was wild when I read that.
There's nothing in the rules that says it has to be white American oak.
I thought it was. I thought that was specified. Okay, continue.
Nope.
Please.
No, we actually have. So we make bourbon and rye and single malt here. So, but I just ordered. I have a couple of brand new heavy char Mizunara oak casks that we're about to put some rye into. That will be classified as rye whiskey according to the U.S. So anyway, getting back to it, the whole thing with oak is that between all the species, I mean, the structures are all fairly similar, right? I mean, just as a genus, like you would kind of expect that. And so what you have is just some of the basic compounds. You have cellulose, which is the most abundant biological polymer on the planet. All right. And it doesn't really do shit. I mean, I guess if you didn't have it, you wouldn't have a barrel. So it forms structure, but it really doesn't do anything chemically. It's not like you're going to get flavors out of cellulose. Okay. So cellulose, whatever. Now you have what's called hemicellulose, which is kind of confusing because it's not exactly related to cellulose, but we just call it hemicellulose and whatever. I'm not a fucking botanist, so I don't know who came up with that. But the thing with hemicellulose is now you're getting into carbohydrates. Okay. And what happens with hemicellulose is that if you just have raw wood that you've cut down, it's not really going to do a lot for you. But where it gets really interesting is when you start heat treating the barrel. So primarily through toasting. The char process actually kind of breaks things down, but the toasting process, and not all barrels, particularly when you talk about whiskeys in the United States, not all barrels are toasted. There is always, just from charring alone, there is a little bit of toast layer. Sometimes they call it the red layer that forms, but most barrels are toasted and then charred. Okay. Regardless of how it's done, whether they do a toast, then char, or whether they just char it, there's always just like a little bit of toast layer in there at least. That toast layer, what happens is those hemicelluloses, they get caramelized. They get toasted. And the caramelization process gives you caramelization byproducts. And so that's where you get some of those really nice sweet notes, those wood sugars, and you get some of those toasty notes as well. Now, where things get really interesting, that's also where your color comes from. So the char process, a lot of people think that's where the color comes from. No. If anything, if you have too much char, it could potentially, in theory, remove color. We're kind of experimenting with that. We have a few char 7, 8, and 9 barrels in our warehouse we had custom did for it. Yeah, they're hilarious. They are just barely standing, but yeah.
How long do you have to char to get to 7, 8, and 9?
It's different depending on the cooperage. Our cooperage told us, I think they went well past a minute. So a char 4 is depending on the cooperage, about like 50 to 60 seconds. This, they went real far past a minute. Yeah, and it's like they gave us a little section of the stave wood for the char 9, and if you even just touch it, it starts to crumble off. So I want them. I'm trying to now, and they told me that the fire alarm in the cooperage went off like 3 different times a day. Yeah, that makes sense. You were basically setting shit on fire. But I'm trying to convince them to do a char 11 because I'm a big Spinal Tap fan, and I want to be able to say that the whiskey went to 11. And then somebody can be like, well, why didn't you just go to 10? And
why not make 10 one more char? Yeah.
But that barrel goes to 11.
I'm fascinated by these char levels. This is wild.
Yeah, so the charring process is pretty important. Now, before I get to the char layer and everything that impacts, probably one of the most important things is lignin. And lignin is it is effectively what makes wood woody. It is the other major structural compound found in all your woody plants, right? But the thing with lignin is that it's really it's not like one molecule. It's sort of this class of molecules in a way, and it's really just kind of this this interweaving web of just two little funky subunits, and they just kind of combine and grow and grow and grow, and it helps give the oak some structure. The thing is, though, is that when lignin is treated with either heat or if it comes into contact with ethanol, it will actually start to break down. And once it starts breaking down and it comes into contact with oxygen, you get this really crazy array of different aromatics. So you get all these different kind of sawn wood notes, or you get vanilla out of this in a couple different forms. So that's one of the most important aspects of the barrel chemistry. Now, once again, the charring process actually destroys a lot of that stuff. It's the toasting process that gives you so much of those compounds. So a lot of people get the impression, they're like, oh, well, if I use it, I want like a whiskey with a really heavy char, so I want those notes. Well, yeah, you'll get some smoky notes and things like that. But you're actually destroying a lot of that vanilla. You're destroying some of those really interesting kind of sawn wood notes. So you have to be a little careful. That being said, the char layer is important. Just it's important in removing things, and it's just activated carbon. And we use activated carbon in our homes and in our daily lives to remove odors. So like your foot powders and your Brita water filters and all that stuff, often used to remove. It's just activated carbon. The more activated carbon you have, so the higher the char level, the more flavor you're going to strip out of the spirit.
Wow.
And so it was really interesting. We actually just started tasting through some of those, like what we call the super chars in our warehouse. And they're good whiskeys, but they are really clean tasting. Like we you get all the way up to like anything above a char 7, and you're like, oh yeah, it's taken a lot of the nuance of the whiskey.
Wow.
Now,
wow.
I kind of expect that to evolve because those barrels are only like 8 months old right now.
Okay.
But yeah, it's been really interesting. Tannins are another thing that you think about, and tannins are kind of like lignin in that there's sort of like a group of molecules, and they're very big and complex. Tannin chemistry is like its own study though, and it's really complicated stuff. Tannin chemistry has a lot to do with color, but also the way the tannins and mouthfeel in particular. So you get a lot of astringency from the tannins very early on. And as the whiskey evaporates out of the barrel, some of that stuff gets really concentrated. So you can get really astringent whiskeys. I think we've probably all had some spirits that have been in the barrel for way too long. I had a producer's 11-year-old whiskey that they were really stoked about getting out into the market, and I'm friends with the guy, and and he makes phenomenal whiskey. But we got a bottle of his oldest release to date. We were just so pumped for it. And this was just like, you could feel it scraping across your tongue. The tannins were just so heavy. So tannins are a big issue. And then you have the whiskey, what we call the whiskey lactones. They're associated with whiskey, but you find them in pretty much all third spirits. And these are funny little compounds that kind of have like coconut and sawn wood aromas to them. They're very important to whiskey production. Now, there are acids as well, and there's a little bit of debate about where some of the acidity is coming from. There are acids that wind up from the oak that wind up into the spirit. Usually acetic acid is what we think of, and acetic acid is pretty reactive, and it will help form a lot of esters. So acetic acid super important, I think, in the end. It kind of helps form ethyl acetate, which is the most important ester in pretty much any alcoholic beverage, but in particular distilled spirits and whiskeys, really American whiskey. Ethyl acetate is almost like a calling card for some of the old style bourbons. Some of the old timers, like if you're talking about Jimmy Russells of the world, some of those guys they would look for that ethyl acetate note. And that's more of a stylistic choice, but yeah.
So what's that manifesting as?
In small amounts, it can be a little fruity. In higher amounts, it can get a little solvent heavy, almost like nail polish remover. And so there's a bit of a balancing aspect there.
Yeah.
That is, I think some of the older bourbons, you do kind of get like a slight solvent note that in small amounts can be really pleasant. But in high amounts, it often means that something went awry during fermentation. There's a pretty bad material contamination or something like that.
Yeah, I feel like that's the note that I would often get in like older Stitzel Wellers.
Yeah.
And just like it's just that right amount that sort of brings it over the top in a really nice way.
Once you taste it and you realize what it is, you'll taste it in most bourbons.
Yeah,
to some degree. Bourbon really kind of lends itself to those notes because bourbon is at its heart, it's a corn spirit, and the type of corn that gets used in bourbon, most bourbons, is not the most aromatically expressive. So it does provide a little bit of sweetness, but it's basically it provides sort of a base for some of these heavier notes to layer on top.
Interesting. But moving along here, but definitely connected, and this is a topic that Joshua brings up in a lot of our interviews. You talk in the book about lower fill strengths and higher fill strengths.
I was afraid you were going to ask about this one.
I'm glad you asked it and not me. So good.
But it's that idea of, amazingly, you could go with a lower fill strength and potentially extract more from the wood. And that kind of battles in my brain a little bit, where more is always better, right?
Right. So let me walk you through this, because what I'm about to say is going to be so frustrating for people. It's frustrating for me to say it at this point.
Okay, was this on your bingo card, by the way?
This actually, so let me explain what has happened since that book and my new book came. So one of the things that with my company that we do, we're very research heavy. We kind of view ourselves as a teaching distillery, but so we allow other distillers to come in, hang out, ask questions, train, whatever. But we also like to partner with other like universities and other entities to just answer questions, because there's a lot that we just don't know about how spirits work, particularly when it comes to maturation. Now, rewind to the 1970s, and there was a paper, an academic paper that was published on fill strengths for bourbon in the United States. And the claim made in that paper, and this was like the last major published study that was done on the topic. And the claim made in that paper was that the lower the fill strength was, the more you extracted, wood sugars and color compounds, tannins, things like that. There was a big flaw with the paper there. And I'm only just now figuring this out. There was a huge flaw with the paper, which was that they didn't really use that many low entry proofs. They actually used, most of the entry proofs that they used were actually, they went up to like 150. So they weren't even legal for American whiskey production.
Oh, wow.
So fast forward to today, and we know Maker's Mark did some of this work looking at entry proofs, but they won't publish it. This is a very common thing in the industry. Like the big guys, they have their own research houses, but they never publish the data. or rarely ever do. And when they do publish it, it's usually like in the form of a press release, and they kind of cherry pick what they want to showcase, all this stuff. We also know that they looked at it, but we don't know specifically how they looked at it, what their experiment really looked like, all that stuff. So depending on what they were trying to go after, there's no telling. So we can't really infer much from anything, except that they just look. So we decided a while back to partner with the university to basically redo this experiment, but redo it in such a way that we felt would be valid for American whiskey producers. So we ended up partnering with Washington State University in Pullman. We were talking about that earlier. And we're working with them. And so what we did was we have barrels at 5 barrels at 125 proof, 5 at 115, 105, 95, and 85. We go into the barrel at 101 on pretty much all of our American whiskeys. Okay. And now it's too early to say much about it because we're still pulling samples and everything. And the project is going to go on for like probably the next year and a half anyway. But from the initial readings, it looks like we were totally fucking wrong. I'm not the only,
published media.
Yeah, I don't feel terrible about it because I'm not the only one out there that was saying this.
I'm glad we brought this up today.
Yeah, I was repeating what I had always been taught. I know other people are doing the same thing. It looks like, at least just from a visual inspection, and we've done some taste sampling as well, it looks like from a visual inspection that there is sort of a maximum extraction at around 125, and it starts to taper off the lower you go. Now, the interesting question about this, I said, well, I still prefer our whiskey when we go into the barrel at 101. And I know Victor's goes into the barrel at 103. And I know that Peerless goes into the barrel at 107. And there's, all these examples. And all of us have been screaming for years, like lower entry proofs are more interesting. It's just, the reason that we've been giving to folks is, well, because we think that it extracts more heavily and, all this stuff. I've started to kind of reformulate my theory about why I like it so much. And the reason, and once again, this is just me coming at it as a whiskey drinker, a consumer. This is my opinion. It's not, what I'm about to say is not grounded. It's because I'm basically just forming an opinion. Why do I like it so much? And the reason that I've come up with, that I suspect what's going on, the reason why I think all these flavors, it's not that I'm getting more extraction. It's that I'm actually getting less. And the reason I seem to like that is because I'm balancing the character of my distillate with that of the barrel a lot more.
Yeah, I was going to ask this. Yeah, okay.
So what, and so what I find really interesting is that Buffalo Trace is sort of like the industry darling for a lot of people, right? I am not, I like Buffalo Trace's products. They are not my favorite. And I started to kind of wonder why, along the same lines, like why everybody loses their mind over Buffalo Trace. And that's totally fine. I'm not judging, that you can love what you love, as my wife likes to say, we will not yuck anyone's yum, words to live by, friends. So I have to live by them because she'll yell at me at that. The thing with Buffalo Trace is that a lot of their products are very oak forward. Yeah. And that is their style. And so if you really love oak, and a lot of people do, Buffalo Trace, their products and a couple of the other guys make perfect sense. For me, I have always been a bit more intrigued about the effect of grain and fermentation character. So to me, I'm like, maybe that is why I like these lower entry proofs a bit more, because the notes and everything to me just seem to come. And we've talked about this a lot internally as we've kind of tasted through these barrels. And it's not that the 125 is bad. It's just that we kind of prefer this lower entry proof. And reading some of the trade publications around the Maker's Mark experiment, that sounds kind of like what they landed on too, was that they sort of preferred the character and the balance, without really getting into the science of like, well, the 125 was more extracted or whatever. They never really used any of those terms, so they didn't really talk about it in those terms. But just reading through the lines a little bit, I kind of suspect that's what they found too.
Okay, yeah. So you're touching on one of the questions I had, which was, if there's so much focus on the barrel itself, and at 125 you're getting this high extraction, you've got all these distilleries that put such a high importance on their mash bill. And why put such an importance on the mash bill if the oak is completely taking over? And so how do we focus in on that mash bill to really give it, the due that it deserves? And it sounds like it's that lower entry point.
It is. Well, and it's just one factor. So I have to be careful about that because, it's really easy for us as distillers and consumers to become really myopic about some of these things and, say, oh, I only really like high rye bourbons, or I only like single malts from Isla, or basically from like this corner of Isla where you have all the heavily peated ones and all this. And it's like, well, okay, but you're just focusing on one thing. All right. And, so I sometimes I'll bring up this, if you know the history of Isla and some of those distilleries, that Lagavulin was built to mimic Lefroy. Mm-hmm. You would never confuse those two today. They don't taste like each other at all. Okay. But if you look at the numbers of how those whiskeys are made, there are immense amount of similarities. They're all using the same yeast. They're largely all using the same grain. The ex-bourbon barrels that they use might come from slightly different, distilleries, but, they're using largely ex-bourbon and blah, blah, blah. And most of those whiskeys are matured in Glasgow. So, yep. So it's like, well, yeah, so you could sit there and talk about the peat, and it's like, well, Ardbeg is at 55 ppm and, Lefroy's at 35, whatever it is. Well, that's the difference. No, there's a lot more to it than that, though. And so we tend to get very myopic about some of these things. But really, and this is something that I get at with in my new book, but also with my students and with the people that work for me. Everything that you do during the whiskey making process affects everything that comes after.
Sure.
And once you start to wrap your head around that, you start to realize why it's so difficult for us as distillers to copy each other, which is kind of a freeing thing once you realize it. I have this whole policy where I will tell people what our recipes are. Actually for our whiskey recipes, they're in the new book. Like all our SOPs, everything. Even with the gin that we make, I tell my guys, I'm like, if somebody were to come in here and they said, hey, I work for Diageo and I want to know exactly, I don't know why Diageo would bother with us, but, we want to know exactly how you make your gin. My guys are instructed to tell them down to the smallest detail how to make it. Because it's not that we're doing anything wildly different. We're very proud of our gin. We're very proud of our whiskeys. It's just all the little choices that we make up. Good luck on trying to copy them.
Yeah.
And it is really difficult. And I think we've kind of reached this very corporately cynical inflection point in the industry. I was at a contract. I just flew back from a consulting trip last night, and yesterday I was at a fairly large contract distillery. And we were having a meeting, and somebody made the comment of, are are you guys are, bottling, this brand right now. And they were like, how did you know that? Oh, well, we found out about it. The thing is that the whiskey that this contract distillery is not normally associated with that brand. That brand is normally made from a different contract distillery. But the corporate ownership has decided now, and this is increasingly more common, that they can basically fit any liquid into that bottle that they want, and people will buy it because of the label. That's where we're at. And I've regularly told my guys that I'm actually really proud that I don't think Diageo would ever be interested in purchasing us, because or Brown Forman or Pernod Ricard, of course they may be the same company pretty soon. I don't think we would, because none of those companies would be able to shoehorn our liquid very easily into a bottle with somebody else's label on it and be like, here, you'll never know the difference. And I think that's kind of part of the problem with the industry, is that, I think a lot of these companies feel like they can kind of get away with that. And maybe on a small level they can, but a lot of people are really getting wise to what's going on. Maybe they don't realize the extreme that some of this stuff is happening. But that to me is just so crazy, So
let me bring you back around, because you've got me formulating my own hypothesis over here, and so I clearly need help from a professional. So we're talking about toasts, we're talking about chars, we're talking about entry, we're talking about extraction. One of the things for us in the nation is we love single malt Scotch, fully matured in ex-bourbon casks, and that can be first fill. That can be second fill, farther down the line, refill. And one of the things we're always saying is not all first fill casks are created equal. And sometimes, and we've done this, the J team, Joshua, Jason and Jess, where we've held up a sample that says first fill and you'd swear it came from sherry. Like it's so dark. Yeah. And obviously you can hold up first fill and it can look quite pale. And I'm kind of curious, A, can you talk us through that process, please? And then B, could that be a place where a high extraction distillery sells a cask onto Scotland that doesn't bring as much colour to that whiskey? You touch on some interesting points there that, really what you're getting at is a distillery or a warehouse's wood policy. And some of them are maybe not managed as tightly as they could be. That may or may not be a good thing, depending on how you look at it. I personally, my wood policy for our single malt is about as chaotic as it can possibly be. And it's, and it's fun, but we see that actually internally with our single malts with cognac casks quite a bit, where we do full term maturation in cognac barrels, and some of them, you pull a sample and it's the lightest color you've ever seen. It's like it's barely even kissed the barrel, and then others it looks like it came from a sherry cask. What is probably happening in some of those instances, there's a couple things. What's probably happening in some instances is that sometimes the barrel doesn't get disgorged completely, and you're just picking up, you effectively have a few liters of bourbon or cognac left in there. Now, that is part of it. Other times it could just be depending on how old the cask is, and obviously an older bourbon barrel, so like Lefroy likes to use 5-year Jim Beam barrels. A lot of that is because they're owned by Jim Beam. That makes it very convenient. But Jim Beam barrels are great. And that's not a crazy amount of age, so there's still a bit of extraction in there that you can pull out. But not always. The other thing, though, is that, and you bring up the entry proof thing, not all of those distilleries are going
into the barrel at 125. Some of them are going in a little bit less, you know, and it varies. I would say the majority of them are. It's not something that I've looked at too heavily. I'd be curious to talk to some of my Scotch whiskey producer buddies and ask them what their experience is with some of the different U.S. distilleries. But yeah, I think that definitely the older the barrel and the higher the entry proof, the lighter that whiskey, even on a first fill, the lighter that whiskey is going to end up looking. That's just my belief. Now, if you were to say, you know, if they were to get barrels from, say, Michter's or me, then yeah, you're going to have some extractives left over. At least that's initially what the data looks like. The thing is just that even Michter's is not that big, you know, and so I don't know. I mean, Michter's is famously a little secretive about, you know, their numbers and what exactly they're doing and how they do it, but they're not huge, you know, so I don't know who's getting their barrels. Somebody is. And I'd be curious to see if somebody's using their barrels alongside, say, you know, a Buffalo Trace barrel. And because there, I would be willing to bet you would get some pretty wild extremes.
Yep. This is exactly what Ian McAllister was talking about at Glen Scotia when he had the opportunity to go through. And, you know, we've said it for years in Scotland, bourbon is just bourbon, right? And it comes from America, and you put your whiskey in it. And now there's more of that conversation. What does my particular spirit do in this particular bourbon cask?
Yeah.
From which producer? And I think there's more of an internal conversation happening there now, with some producers releasing, you know, who the bourbon was in question, and then some still keeping it under wraps. You say something great in the book, if I may read it back to you. And you say, by the time the first spirit has left the cask, American oak is a much tamer beast. Large amounts of tannin have been depleted for a softer mouthfeel. We are mouthfeel guys, which is why I bring it up. While other characters such as the vanillins and lactones are still in decent supply. The vanillins, I think, are obvious to us. We talk about vanillins, you know, it rhymes with a thing we know. The lactones, can you talk a little bit about the lactones that you're referring to there?
So most Scotch whiskey goes into the cask at 63.5% alcohol. So somewhere between 63 and 64%. And that is not by accident. That has been determined just over decades, obviously, of experience and internal research. And they have found that strength range is kind of perfect for extracting whatever character is left in the barrel. You're going to be extracting some actual bourbon into that liquid, even if it's sort of like residual dry mass, but you know, you're going to be extracting it into a liquid. The lactones themselves, the understanding is that those are traditionally, and this is where I'm kind of interested to see how the data shakes out as we start to do the analysis on our barrels. But the lactones have historically been the compounds that people said, oh, you know, that's where the high entry proof stuff really excels, is extracting those lactones. My understanding, I kind of suspect that from our research, that understanding is not going to change. I think that, yeah, probably. In fact, I do know of some research that was done fairly recently in Scotland, looking at entry proofs and why they go in at certain point. And they did find that 63.5%, you got way more extraction. So, yeah.
The reason for the season. There you go. Fantastic.
On that line of conversation where people more focused, Scotch whiskey producers receive those casks and can get those vanillins and the lactic acids. Scotch whiskey producers quite often use octaves and quarter casks and get tremendous results with their whiskeys. In the U.S., there's a lot of small craft producers that will use 30-gallon casks, 25-gallon casks, and don't always have that same success that Scotch whiskey producers are seeing. And I wonder if you can talk to that.
Yeah, it's sort of the eternal small barrel question, and I get asked that a lot, and it's totally reasonable to want to talk about it, because probably you don't see it as much in the U.S. as you did maybe 15 years ago.
That's a good point. Yeah.
But it's still fairly prevalent, the use of smaller barrels. And the idea has always been that you have this much greater surface area to volume ratio inside a smaller barrel than you do in a larger one. And so you get more wood coming into contact with a smaller body of liquid. And that way you're extracting all this stuff a lot better. I always kind of caution people with that. I have worked with small barrels. I currently work with a small group of smaller barrels. I had some 40-gallon barrels custom made for Iron City, because that was the barrel size that was used back in the 1870s.
Interesting.
And I think it took me a while to find a cooperage that would resurrect that size for me. But the interesting thing is that compared to our 53s, which is the bulk of our production, these little 40 gallons are actually maturing a lot slower than our 53s.
Wow.
Like crazy slow. And the whiskey's going in this really beautiful direction, and it's super exciting that, we've been able to resurrect this old cask size and all that stuff. But we're like, wow, this is really slow. I think this actually has to do more with it was made by a different cooper, and the toasting method that they use versus the toasting method that our standard cooper uses are very different from each other. So the extractives and everything are a little different. That being said, that's the whole idea of small barrels. The problem, though, where this is what you run into, is that if your sole definition of maturation is just extraction from the wood, then I guess like you're home free, right? Like that's all you care about. Okay, fuck it. Like who cares? Like you've got color and sweetness in the whiskey, and yeah, you're fine. Use a 3-gallon barrel, right? But that's not what most people. That's not what most people think about when they think of mature spirit character. You need those. For most new make spirit, you need some kind of oxidation to occur. You need esters to form, all this stuff. Well, it can be a bit difficult to get a really nice mature spirit character in smaller barrels, because some of those other reactions don't keep the same pace as the extractive ones. So that is where the issue comes from. And so I tell people, because there was I think I talked about it in the book. There was this famous experiment done in, the results were released in 2012, I think, by Buffalo Trace. And they sort of proclaimed that small barrels make bad whiskey. Now, once again, I like Buffalo Trace. All right. But this was, the way they did the experiment was pretty silly. It was very much designed to give them the result that they wanted. And they didn't, in my opinion, they didn't really think it through all that well. And without getting into how the experiment was conducted, they basically put their whiskey into these small barrels, and they tasted them progressively over a period of 5 years. From like 5, I think 10-gallon, 25, up to a 53 or something like that. And they were able to confidently proclaim that the 53-gallon at the end of 5 years tasted better. And I was like, well, no shit. I mean, the 5 gallon was never supposed to be left that long. That wasn't the idea. No, they did say, well, it never tasted right. And I said, okay, that's the other part of the problem though. Your spirit was not meant to go into a 5 gallon barrel.
There you go. There you go.
That was the problem. Your spirit is meant to go into a 53 or bigger. Okay. The small barrels, really can you make a good whiskey in a small barrel? Absolutely. Yes. It's just a lot harder. That's all. You can totally do it. It's just the challenges go up, and you really have to design the spirit for the cask. That's the big issue.
I think Catoctin Creek is an excellent example who've had great success with that, with their rye. And we've bottled some of their rye, and it just, it's a perfect marriage of spirit to cask size with the 30 gallons that they've used.
Exactly. So, they make a very nice, clean distillate. It has all the right notes in place. They don't need all that char surface area or a ton of oxidation to get you really nice spirit character out of the barrel. Buffalo Trace, though, I like their new make. I think their new make's really nice, but it needs a lot of cleaning up. It needs a lot of oxidation. So that's really only going to happen in a larger cask.
Interesting.
And what we're really talking about with all these questions is just sort of this larger concept of balance. Yeah. That's what you're looking for.
Yeah.
And so, yes, you could absolutely get a very nicely balanced product in a 5 gallon barrel if you design a spirit for it. If everything that you do leading up to that barrel, including warehouse design and all those weird things too that fall into, you can totally do that if you get everything kind of lined up. If you go into it and you're like, well, I'm just going to try this 5 gallon barrel because I'm Buffalo Trace and I'll just shoehorn my liquid in there. That's never going to work. So you have to balance the spirit for the cask.
Yeah. And it's one of the, it's one of the key deliverables in the book that you keep saying is, here are all my opinions. You have to decide for yourself where you want your spirit to go.
I think that's really the thing. I've never said anything earth-shaking or really all that smart. I think that
today's podcast begs to differ.
Well, no, I think what it is that I've said this before. I'm just the village idiot that somehow got elected to town council. I don't know why anybody puts any weight into what I say. It's just like I was sitting out on the corner, like saying something and like babbling about something, and they're like, "Well, you should come talk about stuff." It's like, that's all. That's my entire career. It's just that. It's me not knowing when to shut up. But no, in all seriousness, it's not that anything that I'm saying is not that groundbreaking. I mean, if you think about it, it is pretty simple. It's really just common sense. I think that a lot of distillers out there do try to kind of chase certain styles or, they put a lot like, well, I want to try to taste like Buffalo Trace. And I'm like, okay, I mean, Buffalo Trace is great, but why would you want to do that? There was a producer that I knew and he's a great guy, had a brand in Tennessee and the brand went belly up and he has since started a much more successful distillery and does really great work. But his initial brand, I remember talking with him about this almost 15 years ago. And I was like, well, what is the brand? And he was like, we're going to make Jack Daniels, but we're doing it craft. And I was like, okay, what does that really mean? And he's like, well, we do it. And I'm paraphrasing here. But he's basically like, we do it like Jack Daniels, but we use a pot still and then we charge $50 a month. And I'm like, well, wait, man, I could go buy Jack, and so it was and the whiskey was really good. It was, but it was like, I don't understand, like what's in it for me then as a consumer. If I could just go buy Jack Daniels for at the time, $20-$25, like, I don't understand why I should be paying more than twice that. And unfortunately, the company went up. I think that this is something I harp on a lot with people is all the big guys would really love to convince you that everything that could be said and done with whiskey has already been done.
Yeah.
And I really don't, in my heart of hearts, I don't believe that at all. I think we're just barely scratching the surface of what whiskey could be. Mm-hmm. I remember talking with a mentor of mine who was with Diageo for almost 50 years. He was there back in the DCL days.
Oh, okay.
And the guy has probably forgotten more about whiskey production than I'll ever know. And I remember he said to me one time, he was like, well, we have an ongoing bet in Scotland, ministry with Diageo, that there's nothing the craft guys could do that we haven't already done. And I was like, oh, wow. Okay. Well, I made a whiskey from teff, which is like the Ethiopian grain that they used to make their sponge bread out of. I said, I made a whiskey using teff once. He's like, oh, that's just a different type of starch. That doesn't count. And I was like, well, that's a ridiculous bar for me to meet, isn't it?
Casks are just different types of oak.
Yeah, I was like, it tasted fucking different. So, but that was, and I love the guy. I was actually just hanging out with him last week. But I love the guy. But that gave me this crazy insight into, well, that's how those companies think, though. It's that whiskey is a commodity, first and foremost. And okay, well, for them, maybe it is. I'm willing to bet to the individual guys that are working at Lagavulin, that are working at basically any of Diageo's many distilleries, probably don't view themselves as commodity makers. Yeah. I guarantee Mortlock is one of my favorite of their distilleries, and I guarantee you, the guys at they are making an artisanal product. They just happen to work for one of the big conglomerates, and the guys up in the boardroom may think of it as a commodity, but those guys are making world-class spirit.
Yeah, nice. So, nicely said. Listen, we can keep talking to you. In the interest of what you're just talking about here, in the interest of getting you out of here, I'm curious. You've alluded throughout this episode about projects you're watching, projects you're involved in, getting data points as you go farther along here. What are current projects that you're excited to see your results from?
So
if there are any you can say out loud.
Oh yeah, no, I'm pretty open about everything.
We're back to that,
right? No, so we're doing the barrel entry proof project with Washington State. We are also doing a really interesting project with, and it started out kind of small, and I'm starting to see it sort of snowball a little bit. But I was writing an article last year at some point about, there's this whole thing in the industry, you'll sometimes hear about this slow dilution process.
Yes.
All right.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's something that I think that distillers should do. There are people in the industry that I think kind of preach it to a point that I think is a little silly, though. Like, I tell my guys, I'm like, okay, we marry a few casks together, or, you single barrel, whatever, but we're about to bottle something. I want you to just drop dilute it down to bottle strength, maybe dropping at no more than 2 or 3% ABV per day. Whereas there are some people in the industry that argue that, if you dump it out of the barrel and it comes out at 60% and you need to go into the bottle at 50%, that 10% gap needs to be covered or diluted over a period of, several months. I think that's a bit extreme.
Wow. Yeah.
And so it's like the idea is that if you crash proof there's this fear of this reaction called saponification happening, which sounds a little bit like soap. And that's because that's how soap compounds are made. And,
Okay.
and the chemistry is a little complicated, but, I've judged whiskey, for at like a national competition, and I've I taste whiskey for clients and, all over the place. And you can tell when somebody has saponified the spirit, like, because it becomes a little bitter on the back of the palate. And it's just like, once you taste it, you're like, oh, yep, I can call it out from a mile away.
Wow. Interesting.
Now, the thing is, though, I really don't believe that it's worth spending months and months doing this. I have this theory that I'm like, look, it works for me pretty well. Like, I can do it over a couple of days. So we were partnering with, so I got asked to write an article about this for a trade magazine. And I reached out to a buddy of mine at the James Beam Institute at the University of Kentucky. I was like, hey, do you guys have any data about this? Have you looked? It's like, no, but we've been thinking about it. And that just kind of spun off into like a research project. And he handed it off to an undergrad that was interested in it, just looking for some work. And then we very quickly realized, we're like, oh, yeah, this is like a potential, master's level project. And this kid could take it to, like a PhD if he really wanted to. Because we started, just the first results came out and we were like, oh, yeah. Yeah, so that saponification reaction definitely happens. So now we're like, okay, so how slow do we really have to go? Just, stirring the spirit while you're doing it, does that affect things? Can you cool the spirit down and then mix, so there's all these things that we're looking at, and I'm pretty excited about where that one's going. And then there's, my doctorate research, which gets into really weird territory. But it basically, at a very simple level, it looks at this idea that when you distill single malt whiskey, you have the three liquid fractions. You have your heads or your fours, you have your hearts, or your spirit, and then you have your tails, or in the UK, they just refer to them as faints. The heads and tails get recycled into the next batch of lowlands. Mm-hmm. And they have a lot of acids and, esters and higher alcohols and things like that. And the question is that you would think that by recycling those things every single time, that you would just keep growing the amount of fusel oils and acids in the spirit. Yeah. And that's not what happens at all. It actually reaches a plateau pretty quickly, and it stabilizes. And we've known this for centuries, and people have even made note of it in the literature, and nobody knows why. So, well, we know Diageo looked at it, and we know that Chivas looked at it too. But once again, this is another thing. Like, we don't know exactly how they looked at it. They won't share the data, so it's kind of interesting. And so we're looking at it from different angles, different distillation techniques. I'm even going to drag the chamber still that we have into it. So there's some, that's like a multi-year project that I'm like, am I ever going to get it done? But yeah, it'll be there. So,
when is your awesome, Ethiopian Injera whiskey going to be ready for bottling?
That was a sad one. I did that one probably about like 11, 12 years ago. And it was for a distillery I worked for a long time ago, and it was actually in a small barrel too. After a couple of months, I was telling my boss, I was like, I think we should pull it out, and they were like, no, we're gonna let it go. And then the barrel got forgotten about, and by the time I was like, we should really pull this out, it was too far gone. And I was like, yeah. But anyway, I've worked with a ton of other grains that, But yeah, and then we've got tons of projects here that we're working on as well. So yeah, there's always something there.
This is great. Listen, man, this has been phenomenal. Reading the book, was excellent, asking follow-up questions of you. I highly recommend for all the listeners, Cask Maturation for Distillers. And I'm really eager to get my hands on Whiskey from Grain to Glass, especially if it does exactly what it says on the front cover.
It's like I said,
no
I
mysteries.
told you what the book was about. That's the publisher was like, "Can you write a synopsis for the back?" I was like, "But it's in the title." I don't need to do
It's
anything.
right there.
Yeah, I already wrote so many words for this thing. You're just trying to get blood from a stone here, man. I'm done.
Well, I'm gonna slide you back into the green room. Do not disappear, and we will get out of here, and then we will come back in and say our goodbyes to you. But for the moment, Matt, thanks ever so much.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Cheers, Matt. Oh.
Beautiful. Cracking. Absolutely cracking. Wonderful time. Absolutely wonderful time with the fella.
Yeah. I learned so much. So much.
Did you think you would hear saponification when you woke up this morning?
It was a symphony of saponification.
A cacophony of saponification?
No, yeah, it's there. I've gotten that bitter note that he's talking about, and I've never made that connection. Didn't know where it was coming from. Assumed. Well, I guess I never assumed anything, but didn't know where it was necessarily coming from. So now having that, right, it's a little talking point that, it's nice to share that information.
Right. Use it responsibly, Joshua.
With great
power.
comes, yeah.
I also say for the listeners, there is more talk in the book about oxygen, the role of oxygen in maturation. So, as always with our interviews, we could easily have a second interview with Matt and continue these topics, a third interview.
And allow me to ask more questions, right? I mean,
be careful there, sir. Be careful. Again,
hell.
Madness lies that way. So.
This is true.
All right, tell the viewers what they need to know, and let's get the heck out of here.
Okay, well, if we would allow it, Jason doesn't allow me to ask questions, but we will allow you to ask questions. You can always send questions into us at info@singlecastnation.com. So there it is right on the screen for those that are watching, those that are listening. You can write it down, but not if you're driving. Info@singlecastnation.com. And as always, we would love for you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's always fun. We're getting more and more subscribers, Jason. That's nice.
I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it happen. It's happening live.
Yeah.
What's happening now is happening right now.
No. Yeah. And then also, go over to the Apples and to the Spotifys and give us a 5-star rating. Even if you don't like us, just do the 5-star. Just give us a solid,
It's a hell of a recommendation.
fuck these guys, 5 stars.
The squirrels were right.
And if you leave a comment up there, we will read it on the podcast. There you go.
We'll read nice comments. No, we've read them all.
We have.
Equal opportunity offenders.
All right.
Well, this has been a blast. Really
has.
solid episode. Definitely one for the geeks. Definitely what we're here to do.
Indeed. All right. Well, until next time, Jason, listeners, Matt, it's been lovely.
Awesome. Cheers, Joshua.
Cheers.